On the morning of March 7, 2018, a woman in her seventh month of pregnancy walked through the sliding glass doors of Memorial Şişli Hospital in Istanbul, Turkey. Her name, according to the identification she presented at the reception desk, was Sarah Leibowitz, a 34-year-old Israeli citizen seeking prenatal care while visiting family in Turkey. She wore comfortable maternity clothes, carried a designer handbag, and moved with the slightly awkward gait of someone carrying significant weight in her midsection. To every nurse and doctor who would see her that day, she appeared to be exactly what her paperwork claimed. But Sarah Leibowitz wasn't pregnant. The bulge beneath her loose-fitting dress was a sophisticated prosthetic designed by specialists in Tel Aviv. And her real name was Maya Ravid, a field operative for the Mossad who had spent the previous 8 months preparing for this moment. Because somewhere in that hospital, on one of the maternity wards, was a man who had helped finance 3 terrorist attacks that killed 47 people. And Maya's job was to find him, photograph him, and track him back to wherever he was hiding. This is the story of how Israeli intelligence used a maternity ward as cover for one of their most audacious surveillance operations, how a fake pregnancy became the key to penetrating a Hamas support network, and how one woman spent weeks pretending to be an expectant mother while hunting a man who had evaded capture for nearly 5 years. If you stay with this story until the end, you'll understand exactly how intelligence agencies operate in plain sight, how they turn ordinary locations into operational theaters, and how the most effective cover stories are often the ones that seem most innocent. The man Maya was hunting was named Mahmoud al-Rifai, though he had used at least 7 different names over the past decade. He was 52 years old, born in Gaza City, and had spent most of his adult life moving money for Hamas, the Palestinian militant organization designated as a terrorist group by Israel, the United States, and the European Union. Al-Rifai wasn't a fighter. He'd never carried a weapon or participated directly in an attack. But according to Israeli intelligence, he was responsible for channeling approximately $18 million to Hamas operatives between 2013 and 2017, money that funded weapons purchases, operational expenses, and payments to the families of militants killed or imprisoned. His network moved funds through a complex web of front companies, charitable organizations, and informal money transfer systems that were designed to be nearly impossible to trace. He operated from Turkey, which maintained complicated relations with both Israel and Hamas, allowing Hamas political leadership to maintain offices in Istanbul while also participating in regional diplomacy. For al-Rifai, Turkey was perfect.
It was close enough to the Palestinian territories to maintain connections, far enough from Israeli territory to feel safe, and cosmopolitan enough that a Palestinian businessman with money could blend into the expatriate community without drawing attention. The Mossad have been tracking al-Rifai since 2014, following a bombing in Jerusalem that killed 8 people, including 2 American tourists. The investigation into that attack led Israeli intelligence to a Hamas cell in the West Bank, and the interrogation of captured cell members revealed details about their financing. Money had come through a series of transfers that investigators eventually traced back to accounts controlled by al-Rifai. By late 2015, Israeli intelligence had built a comprehensive profile of al-Rifai's network. They knew he lived somewhere in Istanbul, probably in one of the neighborhoods with significant Arab populations. They knew he traveled frequently to Qatar and Kuwait, where he met with donors and coordinated transfers. They knew he used encrypted communications and avoided patterns that might make him easy to track. What they didn't know, despite 2 years of intensive surveillance efforts, was his exact location in Istanbul. The city had a population of over 15 million people, sprawling across 2 continents, with hundreds of neighborhoods where someone like al-Rifai could disappear. Turkish authorities, when asked informally through intelligence channels, claimed they had no information about al-Rifai's whereabouts, and Israeli intelligence suspected this was more about political convenience than actual ignorance. Turkey under President Erdogan had maintained ties with Hamas as part of its regional strategy, and providing intelligence to Israel about Hamas operatives on Turkish soil would have created diplomatic complications that Ankara preferred to avoid. In January 2017, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Israeli signals intelligence intercepted a phone call between al-Rifai and an associate in Lebanon. The conversation itself was routine, discussing a business transaction that was clearly code for something else. But what caught the analyst's attention was a brief personal exchange at the end. Al-Rifai mentioned that his wife was pregnant with their 5th child, that they were expecting a boy, and that she was receiving excellent care at a private hospital in Şişli, one of Istanbul's more affluent districts. It was the first personal detail about al-Rifai's life that Israeli intelligence had captured in months, and it opened a potential avenue for locating him. If his wife was receiving prenatal care at a hospital in Şişli, there would be records, appointments, a paper trail. But Turkish medical records were not accessible to Israeli intelligence, and attempting to hack into hospital systems would be risky and might alert Turkish counterintelligence.
What they needed was someone on the inside, someone who could physically access the hospital, observe the maternity ward, and identify al-Rafai when he came to visit his wife. The Mossad's planning department, which designs operational concepts before handing them to field divisions for execution, began working on a scenario in early February 2017. The challenge was how to insert an operative into a Turkish hospital in a way that would provide sustained access to the maternity ward without arousing suspicion. Hospital staff would notice unfamiliar faces, security would question anyone who seemed to be loitering, and patients in a maternity ward were there for obvious reasons that were difficult to fake. The solution they developed was elegant in its simplicity. They would send in a pregnant woman, or rather someone pretending to be pregnant, who would register as a patient seeking prenatal care and who would have legitimate reasons to be in the hospital frequently, to spend time in waiting areas, to move through corridors, and observe other patients. The pregnancy would be fake, created with prosthetics sophisticated enough to withstand casual observation and even basic medical examination if necessary. But the cover story would be entirely real. The operative would be an Israeli citizen, which was not unusual since thousands of Israelis lived in or visited Turkey each year, despite the political tensions between the governments. She would have a verifiable background, real documentation, and a plausible explanation for why she was seeking medical care in Istanbul rather than in Israel. Maya Ravid was selected for the operation in March 2017. She was 33 years old, unmarried, and had been with the Mossad for 8 years, working primarily in technical surveillance and document analysis. She spoke fluent Hebrew, English, and Turkish, having studied at Ankara University for a year during her early 20s as part of a cultural exchange program. She had the kind of appearance that allowed her to blend into different environments: medium height, dark hair, features that could pass as Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, or Southern European depending on context. She'd worked undercover before, though never on an operation this complex or this long-term. When the planning department approached her with the concept, they were clear about what it would require. She would need to maintain the cover of being pregnant for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. She would need to attend actual medical appointments, interact with real doctors and nurses, and maintain the deception 24 hours a day because she would be living in Istanbul for the duration of the operation. She would be alone, without a handler physically present in the city, communicating with Tel Aviv only through secure digital channels. And she would be operating in a foreign country where, if she was caught, Israel would likely deny any connection to her. Maya accepted the assignment the same day it was offered. According to her later debriefing, her reasoning was straightforward. Al-Rafai had helped finance attacks that killed Israeli citizens. Finding him and disrupting his network was worth the risk and the discomfort of the operation. The preparation for the operation took 5 months. Maya spent weeks working with the Mossad's technical department to develop a pregnancy prosthetic that would be convincing under various conditions. The device needed to be comfortable enough to wear for 12 to 14 hours at a time, realistic enough to withstand observation by medical professionals, and secure enough that it wouldn't shift or reveal itself during normal movement. The final design was a masterpiece of specialized engineering, a silicone shell that fit over Maya's torso, weighted to simulate the actual mass of a 7-month pregnancy, and textured to feel realistic to the touch. It attached with medical-grade adhesive and could be worn for extended periods without causing skin irritation. The weight distribution was carefully calculated to create the same postural changes and gait modifications that actual pregnancy produces, making Maya's movements naturally authentic. While the technical team worked on the prosthetic, Maya worked on her cover identity. Sarah Leibowitz was created from scratch by the Mossad's documentation department, which specialized in building legends, the false identities used by intelligence officers operating undercover. Sarah was born in Haifa in 1983, had studied graphic design at Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem, worked as a freelance designer, and had married a Turkish-Israeli man named David Leibowitz in 2015. The marriage had ended in divorce in early 2017, which explained why Sarah was now pregnant and alone, seeking prenatal care away from her ex-husband. Every detail of Sarah's life was documented: tax returns showing modest income from freelance work, social media accounts with years of posts and photos establishing her as a real person with friends and interests, credit card records showing normal spending patterns, medical records from Israeli hospitals showing routine healthcare visits, including the initial stages of prenatal care. The story was that Sarah had learned she was pregnant shortly before her divorce was finalized, had decided to keep the baby, and had chosen to spend part of her pregnancy with distant relatives in Istanbul, where she could have privacy and distance from the difficult situation back in Israel. It was a story that would explain why she was seeking care in Turkey, why she was alone, and why she might seem reserved or uncomfortable discussing her personal situation. Maya spent hours studying Sarah Leibowitz's history, memorizing details about her fictional life, practicing responses to questions that doctors or other patients might ask. She worked with a psychologist who specialized in preparing operatives for long-term undercover work, learning techniques for maintaining her cover identity even in stressful situations. She studied pregnancy in detail, reading medical texts, watching videos, talking to women who had been pregnant, learning the physical symptoms, the emotional changes, the concerns and questions that pregnant women typically had. She needed to be convincing, not just in appearance, but in behavior, in the way she talked about the experience, in her reactions to medical information and advice. By August 2017, Maya was ready. But the operation couldn't proceed until Israeli intelligence confirmed that al-Rafai's wife was actually receiving care at a specific hospital, and that al-Rafai was still in Istanbul. The signals intelligence teams continued monitoring al-Rafai's communications, and in late October 2017, they intercepted another call that provided the confirmation they needed. Al-Rafai mentioned his wife had given birth to a son, that mother and baby were healthy, and that they had received excellent care at Memorial Shishli Hospital. Now the Mossad knew where al-Rafai's wife had been treated, but the information created a new problem. If his wife had already given birth, she would no longer be coming to the hospital for prenatal care, which meant Maya's cover for accessing the maternity ward was less relevant. But hospital records would show which doctor had treated al-Rafai's wife, and there was a possibility that the family would return for postnatal checkups, or that the wife might become pregnant again. The planning department decided to proceed with the operation, but modified the timeline. Maya would establish herself as a patient at Memorial Shishli Hospital, build relationships with staff, learn the layout and routines of the maternity ward, and position herself to identify al-Rafai if and when he appeared. The operation was approved in November 2017, and Maya arrived in Istanbul on December 3, 2017. Write in the comments what city you're watching us from. The apartment that the Mossad had secured for Maya was in Nishantashi, a fashionable neighborhood in the Shishli district, about a 15-minute walk from Memorial Shishli Hospital. It was a furnished two-bedroom unit on the third floor of a modern building, the kind of place where a young professional or someone with moderate means might temporarily live. The lease was under Sarah Leibowitz's name, paid for 6 months in advance with funds that came from an Israeli bank account that had been established as part of the cover identity. Maya moved in with 2 suitcases of clothes and personal items, all carefully selected to match Sarah's supposed lifestyle and taste. She spent her first week in Istanbul settling into the neighborhood, shopping at local stores, eating at nearby restaurants, establishing herself as a resident.
She walked past Memorial Shishli Hospital multiple times, observing the entrances, the security procedures, the flow of patients and visitors. She noted that the hospital was large and modern, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, serving both Turkish and international patients. On December 11, 2017, Maya made her first visit to Memorial Shishli Hospital as a patient. She had called ahead to schedule a prenatal appointment, explaining that she was new to Istanbul and needed to establish care. She wore the pregnancy prosthetic, which she had put on that morning in her apartment, carefully checking in the mirror to ensure it looked natural. She dressed in loose-fitting maternity clothes purchased from Turkish stores, carried a handbag with her Sarah Leibowitz identification and medical documents, and walked to the hospital with the slightly waddling gait that the weighted prosthetic naturally created. At the reception desk, she presented her Israeli passport and explained in fluent Turkish that she needed to see an obstetrician. The receptionist was friendly and professional, asking routine questions about her due date, her medical history, whether she had any complications. Maya answered smoothly, explaining that she was due in early April 2018, that her pregnancy had been uncomplicated so far, and that she had been receiving care in Israel but had recently moved to Istanbul temporarily. The receptionist directed her to the maternity wing on the second floor and gave her paperwork to fill out. The maternity wing at Memorial Shishli Hospital was designed with the comfort of expectant mothers in mind. The waiting area was spacious and well lit, with comfortable chairs, magazines in multiple languages, and a small play area for children who accompanied their mothers to appointments. Maya sat down to fill out her forms, observing everything around her. There were about a dozen other women in the waiting area, most of them visibly pregnant, some accompanied by partners or family members. The atmosphere was calm and routine. Nurses moved efficiently between examination rooms, calling patients back for their appointments. Maya noted the locations of security cameras, the layout of the corridors, leading to different sections of the wing, the positioning of staff offices and storage rooms. She was called back for her appointment after about 20 minutes. The obstetrician, Dr. Aylan Kaya, was a woman in her late 40s with warm manner and excellent English. She conducted a routine prenatal examination, asking questions about Maya's health, her symptoms, her plans for delivery. Maya had prepared for this moment extensively, knowing that the examination would be the most challenging part of maintaining her cover. The prosthetic had been designed to withstand external examination, feeling realistic to the touch, but it couldn't simulate internal conditions.
Maya had prepared a cover story for this as well. explaining that she preferred to avoid internal examinations unless medically necessary because she found them uncomfortable. Dr. Kaya accepted this without question, noting that as long as there were no complications, routine monitoring could be done externally. The appointment lasted about 30 minutes. Dr. Kaya measured what she believed was Maya's pregnant belly, checked blood pressure, discussed nutrition and exercise, and scheduled a follow-up appointment for 2 weeks later. Maya left the hospital feeling that the first phase of her cover had been successfully established. Over the next several weeks, Maya became a regular presence at Memorial Shishley Hospital. She attended appointments every 2 weeks, spent time in the waiting areas, struck up conversations with other patients, and gradually built familiarity with the staff. She learned the names of the nurses, chatted with the receptionists, and became known as the quiet Israeli woman who was spending her pregnancy away from home. The routine gave her extensive access to the maternity ward and allowed her to observe patterns and gather information without arousing suspicion. What Maya was actually doing during these visits was conducting systematic surveillance. She photographed every woman who came through the maternity ward, using a camera concealed in her handbag that looked like a standard women's accessory but contained a high-resolution lens. She documented the schedules of medical staff, noting which doctors and nurses worked with shifts, when the ward was busiest, when security was most relaxed. She identified the hospital's record-keeping systems, noting where patient files were stored and how the administrative processes worked. And she watched for any sign of al-Rafai or his family. The challenge was that Maya didn't know what al-Rafai looked like. Israeli intelligence had no photographs of him, only physical descriptions provided by sources and witnesses. He was described as average height, average build, with a beard that he sometimes shaved, dark hair that was graying at the temples, and no distinctive features that would make him easy to identify. Maya was looking for a man who matched that description and who appeared to be visiting the maternity ward with frequency that suggested a personal connection, not just a casual visitor. By early February 2018, Maya had been maintaining her cover for 2 months. She had attended 6 prenatal appointments, spent dozens of hours in the hospital's waiting areas, and documented hundreds of patients and visitors. She had identified 3 men who visited the maternity ward regularly and who matched the general description of al-Rafai, but she couldn't confirm any of their identities without additional information. The operation was becoming frustrating.
Maya was spending 12 to 14 hours a day wearing the pregnancy prosthetic, maintaining her cover identity, and living alone in a foreign city with minimal communication with her handlers in Tel Aviv. The psychological strain of long-term undercover work was beginning to show, and Maya recognized the signs from her training: isolation, stress, the constant vigilance required to maintain deception, and all taking their toll. Then on February 19, 2018, something changed. Maya was sitting in the maternity ward waiting area for her scheduled appointment when she noticed a man entering through the main doors. He was approximately 50 to 55 years old, medium height and build, with a neatly trimmed beard that was gray and black. He wore expensive casual clothing, dark slacks and a leather jacket, and he carried a gift bag. What caught Maya's attention was his demeanor. He walked with confidence, clearly familiar with the hospital layout, and he didn't stop at the reception desk or check in with any staff. He walked directly to one of the examination room corridors as if he knew exactly where he was going. Maya's instinct told her this was significant. She waited a few minutes, then excused herself from the waiting area, telling a nurse she needed to use the restroom. Instead, she moved quietly down the corridor where the man had gone, staying close to the wall and observing. Through the partially open door of one of the rooms, she could see the man standing next to a hospital bed where a woman was holding a newborn baby. The man leaned down to kiss the woman's forehead, then carefully took the baby in his arms, his face showing clear affection and pride. Maya raised her handbag slightly, angling it so the concealed camera could capture images of the man's face. She took several photographs from different angles, then quietly returned to the waiting area before anyone noticed her absence. That evening, in her apartment, Maya transmitted the photographs to Tel Aviv through an encrypted communication channel. The images were analyzed by the Mossad's facial recognition systems and compared against the limited information Israeli intelligence had about al-Rafai. Within 12 hours, Maya received a message back. The analysis couldn't confirm the man's identity definitively because there were no existing photographs of al-Rafai to compare against, but the physical characteristics matched the descriptions in their files, and his presence in the maternity ward visiting a woman with a newborn was consistent with what they knew about al-Rafai's family situation. Tel Aviv instructed Maya to focus her surveillance on this individual, to document his visits, to attempt to follow him when he left the hospital, and to gather any additional information that might confirm his identity. Over the next 3 weeks, Maya observed the man visiting the hospital 7 times. His pattern was consistent.
He arrived in the late morning or early afternoon, spent approximately 30 to 45 minutes with the woman and the baby, and then departed. He never arrived or left at the same time, varying his schedule in a way that suggested he was conscious of security and avoiding predictable patterns. Maya documented each visit, photographing him from multiple angles, noting the times and any details about his behavior or interactions. On March 9, 2018, Maya decided to attempt a more direct approach. She positioned herself in the hospital's ground floor atrium, a large open space with seating areas and a cafe, knowing that the man would need to pass through this area when leaving. When he appeared, walking toward the exit, Maya stood up and deliberately walked in a path that would intersect his. As they passed each other, she stumbled slightly, a realistic accident given her apparent pregnancy, and dropped her handbag. The man stopped immediately, as Maya had hoped he would, and bent down to help her pick up the items that had spilled from her bag. "I'm so sorry," Maya said in Turkish, her accent marking her as a foreigner. "I'm clumsy these days." The man smiled kindly. "No problem at all," he replied in Turkish. "You should be careful. When is your baby due?" "Next month," Maya said, touching her prosthetic belly. "It feels like forever." They chatted for less than a minute, a brief, pleasant exchange between two people in a hospital. The man wished her well, handed her the last of her belongings, and continued toward the exit. Maya watched him go, her heart racing, knowing that she had just had direct contact with a man who might be responsible for financing terrorist attacks that killed dozens of people. If you're enjoying this investigation so far, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button so you don't miss future stories about intelligence operations. The brief conversation with the man in the hospital atrium provided Maya with something she hadn't had before, a voice sample. She had recorded the interaction using a device concealed in her jacket, and that night she transmitted the audio to Tel Aviv. Voice analysis technology had advanced significantly in recent years, and the Mossad had access to sophisticated systems that could compare voice patterns against known recordings. But once again, the challenge was that Israeli intelligence had no existing voice recordings of al-Rafai to compare against. What they could do was analyze the man's accent and speech patterns to determine his regional background, which might provide additional confirmation of his identity. The analysis came back within 24 hours. The man's Arabic accent, when he occasionally used Arabic words in his Turkish conversation, was consistent with someone from Gaza or the southern Palestinian territories. Combined with his age, his appearance, his visits to the maternity ward, and his careful security consciousness, the circumstantial evidence was building that this man was Mahmoud al-Rafai. But circumstantial evidence wasn't enough for what came next. If Israeli intelligence wanted to take action against al-Rafai, whether that meant attempting to arrest him through cooperation with Turkish authorities, which seemed unlikely, or considering other options that the Mossad might pursue, they needed definitive confirmation of his identity. The planning department in Tel Aviv began working on scenarios for how to obtain that confirmation. One option was to attempt to access the hospital's records, to find documentation about the woman al-Rafai was visiting, and see if it provided any connection to his identity. Another option was to follow al-Rafai from the hospital to wherever he was living and attempt to gather additional intelligence from his residence. Both options carried significant risks, but the second option seemed more feasible. Following someone in Istanbul required careful planning and resources, but it was within the capabilities of a well-trained operative with support from Tel Aviv. On March 14, 2018, Maya prepared for what would be the most dangerous phase of her operation. She had observed that al-Rafai typically departed the hospital between 12:30 and 1 p.m. after his morning visits. She positioned herself in the hospital parking garage, having rented a car the previous day, and waited for him to appear. When al-Rafai emerged from the hospital and walked to his vehicle, a dark blue BMW sedan, Maya started her engine and prepared to follow. She had received training in surveillance driving, but following someone through Istanbul's chaotic traffic was challenging even for experienced operatives. The key was maintaining visual contact without being obvious, staying close enough that you didn't lose the target at traffic lights or in heavy congestion, but far enough back that the target didn't notice the same car behind them repeatedly. Al-Rafai drove north from Shishli, moving through heavy midday traffic toward the Sarıyer district on the European side of Istanbul. Maya followed at a distance, allowing other cars to position themselves between her vehicle and al-Rafai's, changing lanes frequently to avoid establishing a pattern. After approximately 35 minutes of driving, al-Rafai turned into a residential neighborhood in Emirgan, an affluent area known for its historic Ottoman mansions and waterfront properties along the Bosphorus. Maya slowed down, allowing more distance to open up between them, knowing that in a residential area with less traffic, a following vehicle would be more noticeable. She watched as al-Rafai pulled into the driveway of a large two-story house surrounded by a high wall and a gate.
The gate opened automatically, suggesting it was controlled remotely, and al-Rifai drove inside.
The gate closed behind him. Maya drove past the house without slowing, noting the address and the physical characteristics of the property. She circled the block once, photographing the house from different angles using her concealed camera, then drove back towards Shishli. That evening, Maya transmitted all the information she had gathered to Tel Aviv. The address in Emergan, the photographs of the house, the vehicle description and license plate, everything that might help Israeli intelligence confirm whether this location was connected to Mahmoud al-Rifai. The Mossad's analysts went to work immediately, cross-referencing the address against property records, utility bills, vehicle registrations, and any other available databases. Turkish property records were not always easily accessible to foreign intelligence services, but the Mossad had cultivated sources and developed methods over years of operations in Turkey. Within 48 hours, they had an answer. The house in Emergan was owned by a shell company registered in Cyprus, but deeper investigation revealed that the company's beneficial owner was listed as Mahmoud Hassan, one of the known aliases that al-Rifai had used in the past. Combined with everything else Maya had documented, the visual identification, the visits to the maternity ward, the voice analysis, and now the property connection, Israeli intelligence assessed with high confidence that the man Maya had been surveilling was indeed Mahmoud al-Rifai. The question then became what to do with this information. The Mossad had several options. They could share the intelligence with Turkish authorities and request al-Rifai's arrest and extradition, though given Turkey's political relationship with Hamas, this seemed unlikely to succeed. They could continue surveillance, monitoring al-Rifai's activities and attempting to gather intelligence about his network and his operations, potentially disrupting his financial transfers without physically capturing him. Or they could consider what in intelligence terminology is called direct action, operations designed to eliminate or neutralize a target when other options are not feasible. The decision about which course to pursue would be made at the highest levels of Israeli government and intelligence leadership, and Maya would not be informed about those deliberations. Her role in the operation was complete. She had successfully identified and located a high-value Hamas target who had evaded capture for years, and she had done so using nothing but a fake pregnancy and methodical surveillance work. On March 22, 2018, Maya received instructions from Tel Aviv to begin extracting herself from the operation. She was to attend one more prenatal appointment, then gradually reduce her presence at the hospital, eventually leaving Istanbul and returning to Israel.
The cover story would be that Sarah Leibowitz had decided to return to Israel for the remainder of her pregnancy to be closer to family and familiar doctors. It was a natural progression that wouldn't arouse suspicion. Maya attended her final appointment on March 26th. She thanked Dr. Kaya for the excellent care, explained that she had decided to return home, and assured the doctor that she would continue her prenatal care in Israel. Dr. Kaya wished her well and asked her to send news when the baby was born. Maya promised she would, knowing she never would, knowing that Sarah Leibowitz would simply disappear, that the apartment lease would expire, that the phone number would be disconnected, and that no one would ever know that the pregnant Israeli woman had been an intelligence operative hunting a terrorist financier. Maya left Istanbul on March 29, 2018, flying to Tel Aviv on a commercial flight. She had been undercover for nearly 4 months, wearing the pregnancy prosthetic for 12 to 14 hours a day, maintaining her cover identity continuously, and living with the constant stress of knowing that one mistake could expose her operation and potentially endanger her life. According to her later debriefing, the psychological toll of the operation was significant. Living alone in a foreign city, pretending to be someone else, maintaining a cover story that required constant vigilance, it all created a level of stress that was difficult for people who hadn't experienced it to understand. But she had succeeded. She had accomplished what the operation set out to do. What happened next has never been fully disclosed by Israeli authorities. According to reports that emerged in Turkish media in late 2018, Mahmoud al-Rifai disappeared from Istanbul in May 2018. His family reported him missing to Turkish police, claiming he had left home one morning and never returned. Turkish authorities investigated but found no evidence of foul play, no body, no witnesses to any crime. Al-Rifai simply vanished, and his whereabouts remain unknown. Israeli intelligence has never commented publicly on al-Rifai's disappearance, maintaining their standard policy of neither confirming nor denying specific operations. But intelligence analysts and journalists who cover Middle Eastern affairs have noted the timing, the fact that a Hamas financier who had operated successfully for years suddenly disappeared within weeks of the period when Maya Ravid was conducting surveillance in Istanbul.
The assumption among those who follow these matters is that Israeli intelligence used the information Maya gathered to conduct an operation against al-Rafai, though what exactly that operation entailed, whether it was an abduction, an assassination, or something else entirely, remains classified. Maya Ravid's operation became a case study within the Mossad, used in training programs to demonstrate effective undercover work and operational planning.
The use of a fake pregnancy as cover was considered particularly innovative, providing legitimate access to a target location and creating a cover identity that was both convincing and difficult to question. According to former intelligence officers who have spoken about the operation in general terms, the success of Maya's surveillance work validated the approach of using long-term undercover operations, even in challenging environments like Turkey, where Israeli intelligence operates with significant constraints. Maya herself continued working for the Mossad after the Istanbul operation, though her assignments shifted to roles that didn't require extended undercover work. According to sources familiar with her career, the psychological impact of spending 4 months pretending to be pregnant, living alone in a foreign city, and hunting a dangerous target took time to process, and she requested assignment to positions that allowed her to work from Tel Aviv with a more normal routine. The Memorial Shishli Hospital, where Maya conducted her surveillance operation, continues to operate as one of Istanbul's premier private medical facilities, serving thousands of patients each year, including many international visitors. The staff who interacted with Sarah Leibovitz, the pregnant Israeli woman who attended appointments between December 2017 and March 2018, have no idea that they were part of an intelligence operation. Dr. Aylan Kaya, the obstetrician who treated Maya, would later tell a journalist who was researching Israeli intelligence operations, though without naming Maya specifically, that she remembered several foreign patients from that period, but couldn't recall anything unusual about any of them. The maternity ward looks the same as it did in 2018. The same comfortable waiting area, the same examination rooms, the same professional staff providing care to expectant mothers. There's no indication that anything unusual ever happened there, no memorial or marker, nothing to suggest that a Mossad operative once walked those halls, tracking a Hamas Financier. The sophistication of Maya's cover was such that even now, years after the operation, it would be difficult for Turkish authorities to prove definitively that Sarah Leibovitz wasn't a real person seeking real medical care. The documentation was thorough, the behavior was authentic, the cover story was airtight. This is the nature of professional intelligence work, the creation of realities so convincing that they become indistinguishable from actual reality, at least to those who aren't looking for deception. The pregnancy prosthetic that Maya wore is now kept at Mossad headquarters, stored in a secure facility where specialized equipment and training materials are maintained.
It's been used to train other operatives in the construction and use of similar devices, and according to intelligence sources, variations of the fake pregnancy cover have been employed in subsequent operations in different contexts and locations. The broader impact of the al-Rafai operation, assuming Israeli intelligence did conduct an operation against him following Maya's surveillance work, was significant within the Hamas financial network. According to assessments by counterterrorism analysts, the disappearance of al-Rafai created uncertainty and fear among other Hamas financiers, many of whom were operating in Turkey and other countries where they had felt relatively safe from Israeli reach. The message, intended or not, was that Israeli intelligence could track and locate individuals, even in countries where Israel had no official presence and limited cooperation from local authorities. This had a chilling effect on Hamas financial operations, forcing the organization to restructure how it moved money and managed its network of facilitators and donors. For Maya Ravid personally, the operation represented both a professional achievement and a personal challenge that took years to fully process. In interviews conducted years later, after she had left the Mossad and was able to speak more freely about her experiences, though still limited by classification restrictions, Maya described the Istanbul operation as the most difficult and most rewarding assignment of her career. The difficulty wasn't primarily physical, though wearing a pregnancy prosthetic for extended periods was uncomfortable and created real physical strain. The difficulty was psychological, the isolation of living undercover, the constant need to maintain deception, the moral complexity of hunting another human being, even one who had helped finance terrorist attacks. Maya spoke about the moment in the hospital atrium when she deliberately stumbled and al-Rafai helped her pick up her belongings, how he had been kind and courteous, how he had seemed like an ordinary person rather than someone responsible for deaths and suffering. That cognitive dissonance, the gap between the human being in front of you and the abstract knowledge of what they've done, was something that stayed with her. The story of how a pregnant Mossad agent tracked a Hamas financier inside an Istanbul maternity ward is ultimately a story about the invisible war that intelligence agencies wage constantly.
operations that take place in hospitals and shopping centers and ordinary neighborhoods, conducted by people who look like everyone else, but who are engaged in activities that most of us never see or understand.
It's a story about the lengths to which intelligence services will go to track their targets, the creativity they employ in developing cover stories and operational concepts, and the dedication of individual operatives who spend months living double lives in service of missions they believe in. Maya Ravid spent 4 months pretending to be pregnant, attending medical appointments, sitting in waiting rooms, building relationships with hospital staff, all while systematically hunting a man who had helped finance terrorist attacks. She succeeded because her cover was convincing, because her tradecraft was excellent, and because she had the patience and discipline to maintain the operation for as long as it took to achieve the objective. The operation also demonstrates how intelligence work has evolved in the 21st century. Traditional espionage often involved dramatic actions, car chases, and shootouts, at least in popular imagination. Modern intelligence work is more often about patience, about maintaining cover, about gathering information piece by piece until a complete picture emerges. Maya didn't catch al-Rafai through action movie heroics. She caught him by attending prenatal appointments, by observing patterns, by taking photographs, by following a car through traffic, by doing methodical surveillance work that required skill and dedication, but looked to anyone watching like nothing at all. The fake pregnancy was inspired cover story because it gave her everything she needed: access to the target location, a reason to be there repeatedly, an identity that was difficult to question, and a time frame that created natural urgency without seeming suspicious. Who would suspect a pregnant woman attending medical appointments of being an intelligence operative? The assumption of innocence that pregnancy creates, the social protections and sympathies it generates, made Maya effectively invisible as an operative while giving her complete freedom of movement within the hospital. The technical aspects of the operation, the design of the prosthetic, the creation of the cover identity, the secure communications with Tel Aviv, all demonstrated the sophisticated capabilities that modern intelligence services possess. But the human element was just as important. Maya's ability to maintain her composure, to stay in character, to build relationships with hospital staff while maintaining emotional distance, to handle the stress and isolation of undercover work, these were skills that no amount of technology could replace. Intelligence work ultimately depends on individual human beings making decisions, taking risks, and maintaining their cover under pressure. The Mossad selected Maya for this operation because she had those qualities, and she proved them over 4 months in Istanbul. The question of what ultimately happened to Mahmoud al-Rafai remains officially unanswered.
His family believes he was kidnapped or killed by Israeli intelligence, a claim they have made publicly to Turkish media and international human rights organizations. Turkish authorities investigated his disappearance, but concluded they had no evidence to support any particular theory about what happened to him. Israeli intelligence has maintained complete silence on the matter, which is consistent with their long-standing policy regarding covert operations. In the murky world of intelligence work and counterterrorism, some questions remain unanswered, not because the answers don't exist, but because revealing them would compromise sources, methods, and future operations. What can be said with confidence is that Maya Ravid successfully completed her mission, that she identified and located a high-value target, and that shortly after her operation concluded, that target disappeared. For those who study intelligence history and operations, the Istanbul Maternity ward surveillance represents a particularly elegant example of operational planning. The Mossad identified a vulnerability in their target's life, his wife's pregnancy and medical care, and they developed a method to exploit that vulnerability by inserting an operative who had legitimate cover for accessing the same medical facility. The operation required no technology beyond cameras and communications equipment that could fit in a handbag, no sophisticated hacking or electronic surveillance, just human intelligence work conducted with skill and patience. It's the kind of operation that reminds us that despite all the advanced technology available to modern intelligence services, sometimes the most effective approach is putting a trained operative on the ground with a good cover story and clear mission. The legacy of Maya Ravid's operation extends beyond the specific case of Mahmoud al-Rafi. It demonstrated that Israeli intelligence could conduct extended undercover operations in Turkey, despite the political complications, and despite operating in a major city of 15 million people where they had limited support infrastructure. It showed Hamas and other organizations that their operatives were not safe, even in countries that were politically sympathetic to their cause. And it provided a template for future operations, a proof of concept that fake pregnancy could be used as effective cover for intelligence work in medical settings.
According to intelligence analysts who have studied the operation, similar approaches have been used subsequently by various intelligence services in different contexts, though specific details remain classified. For the average person, the story of Maya Ravid's operation in Istanbul might seem like something from a spy novel, too elaborate or too risky to be real.
But this is exactly how modern intelligence work often functions, with operatives living double lives for extended periods, maintaining cover stories that require constant attention and vigilance, taking calculated risks in foreign countries where discovery could mean imprisonment or death. The work is methodical, often tedious, and requires psychological strength that most people don't possess. Maya spent weeks sitting in hospital waiting rooms, wearing an uncomfortable prosthetic, pretending to be someone she wasn't, all to gather information that would eventually be used against a target. There were no dramatic confrontations, no moments of action movie excitement, just careful, patient intelligence work conducted professionally over an extended period. The human cost of this work is something that's often overlooked when we think about intelligence operations. Maya spent 4 months of her life in Istanbul, isolated from friends and family, living under an assumed identity, dealing with the stress of knowing that any mistake could expose her operation. She couldn't form real relationships because every interaction was part of her cover. She couldn't relax because she was always performing. And when she finally completed her mission and returned to Israel, she had to process the psychological impact of having lived that way for so long. Intelligence agencies provide psychological support for operatives who complete difficult undercover assignments, but the adjustment from living a double life back to normal existence is always challenging. Maya's case was particularly complex because of the nature of her cover, pretending to be pregnant, attending real medical appointments, interacting with doctors and nurses who believed they were caring for an expecting mother. The ethical dimensions of that deception, the relationships she formed under false pretenses, the trust she violated in service of her mission, these are complexities that intelligence operatives must grapple with. So write in the comments what city you're watching us from, and subscribe to our channel to hear more incredible true stories about intelligence operations around the world. The story of how a pregnant Mossad agent tracked a Hamas financier inside an Istanbul maternity ward shows us that the real world of espionage is often more creative, more patient, and more psychologically demanding than fiction suggests, and that sometimes the most effective cover stories are the ones that seem most innocent.